The grand chamber stretched beyond what eyes could measure, and thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled every corner with their presence and their hope for answers that might change everything they knew about existence itself. Maya Brooks stood near the back of the massive hall with her hands tucked into the pockets of her standard-issue uniform and her brown hair pulled back in a simple tie that kept falling loose no matter how many times she fixed it during the long ceremony. She was just 24 years old and worked as a junior engineer aboard the human diplomatic vessel called Odyssey. Dawn and nobody important ever noticed her presence at these grand events where leaders made speeches and ancient species revealed secrets. The Kevallari had called this emergency session, and now their High Sage stood at the center platform with something that glowed between his six-fingered hands and cast strange shadows that moved against the flow of light. Maya watched as the elderly alien lifted the crystalline device higher, and the entire chamber fell into a silence so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat drumming in her ears like distant thunder before a storm. The object was beautiful in a way that hurt to observe, and its structure seemed to fold in on itself repeatedly while somehow remaining whole and functional and impossible. According to every law of physics that Maya had studied during her years at the Academy, the High Sage began to speak in his ancient tongue, and the translation devices hummed softly as they converted his words into hundreds of languages. Simultaneously across the vast assembly, he explained that this artifact had been discovered buried in the remnants of a collapsed star system over 3 million years ago by the earliest Kevallari explorers who had ventured beyond their home galaxy in search of knowledge and purpose. For all those millions of years, the Kevallari had studied the device with their best minds and their most advanced tools, but they could never fully understand its function or determine who had created something so far beyond their comprehension. The device could manipulate space and time itself according to their limited tests, and it contained energy sources that should not exist within the known laws of reality, and it responded to consciousness in ways that suggested intelligence far beyond organic or synthetic life. Maya felt something strange stirring in the back of her mind as she stared at the artifact, and memories that did not belong to her current life began pushing against the walls she did not know existed until this very moment. The crystalline lattice looked familiar in a way that made her chest tight and her breathing shallow, and suddenly she was not standing in the council chamber anymore, but somewhere else entirely, where stars died and were born again in the same instant. She blinked hard and forced herself back to the present moment, but the feeling would not go away and kept pulling at something deep inside her consciousness, like a key turning in a lock that had rusted shut over countless centuries. The High Sage continued his presentation and explained how the device had become the most sacred relic of the Kevallari civilization, and how they had built their entire religion and philosophy around the mystery of its origin and purpose. He said that today they had finally activated its primary function and discovered that it was sending a signal outward across all of space and time, and they believed this signal was meant to call its creators home after their long absence from the physical realm. The gathered representatives whispered among themselves with excitement and fear mixing together in equal measure, because the implications were staggering and could reshape their understanding of cosmic history and their place within it. Maya felt her lips moving before her brain could stop them, and words came out in a voice that sounded like hers, but also like someone else, speaking through her across an impossible distance of time and memory. She said she knew what that device was, and that she had built one exactly like it for her high school science fair back in the year 2187, and the statement hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The beings nearest to her turned with expressions of shock and disbelief and anger, because what she had just claimed was not only impossible but bordered on heresy against one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. The High Sage stopped speaking, and his ancient eyes fixed on Maya with an intensity that made her want to shrink into nothing, but she stood her ground. Even as security forces began moving through the crowd toward her position, she was not sure why she had spoken those words or how she knew they were true, but something about the artifact had unlocked memories that felt both foreign and intimately familiar, like remembering a dream from childhood that had shaped everything that came after. A Kevallari commander with military decorations Covering his chest armor demanded that she be arrested immediately for disturbing the sacred ceremony and for making false claims about their most holy relic. Other species representatives joined in the calls for her removal, and some suggested she be interrogated to determine if she was part of some human conspiracy to undermine the Chevalerie authority and steal their ancient knowledge. Maya opened her mouth to explain, but she did not have words that would make sense to anyone, including herself, because how could she explain memories that belonged to someone she had never been in a life she had never lived? Then reality itself began to tear apart behind her with a sound like fabric ripping across dimensions, and violet light poured through the opening with an intensity that forced everyone to shield their eyes. A figure stepped through the portal, with movements that spoke of countless battles and the grace of someone who had walked between worlds. Since before recorded history began its long and winding path, she was tall and slender with silver hair that moved like liquid metal even in the still air of the chamber, and her armor bore runes that glowed with power older than most of the stars visible through the massive windows. Her eyes were the color of ancient ice, and they held wisdom and sorrow in equal measure as she surveyed the assembly with a look that suggested she had seen civilizations rise and fall like waves upon an endless shore. Behind her came a dragon that should not exist in this age of science and technology, but there he was with scales that reflected light in impossible colors and wings that seemed to phase between dimensions. The dragon was massive but moved with surprising grace, and his eyes held an intelligence that matched or exceeded any being in the chamber, and Maya felt her heart recognize him before her mind could catch up. The woman spoke, and her voice carried across the chamber without need for amplification or translation, because somehow everyone understood her words regardless of their native language or the structure of their consciousness. She said the time had come for the architect to remember her true nature, and that the war, which had ended long ago, was not actually over but merely waiting for the right moment to resume its terrible course. She said her name was Aria Silvermoon, and she had sworn an oath longer ago than most species could comprehend to find and protect Maya Brooks when the signs of the ancient enemy began appearing once more. The dragon beside her made a sound that was part growl and part song, and Maya felt something inside her respond to it like a tuning fork resonating with a frequency it was designed to match. Security forces surrounded them with weapons raised, but none dared to fire because the power radiating from Arya and her dragon companion made it clear that any attack would be futile and possibly fatal. Arya extended her hand toward Maya and spoke directly to her with words that cut through all the confusion and fear, and awakening memories to reach the truth buried beneath layers of sealed knowledge. She said it was time to go home and remember who Maya really was before the Void Collective found her again and finished what they had started during the first war that had consumed entire dimensions. Maya did not understand most of what Arya said, but her body moved without conscious thought as she began walking toward the portal, even as the council leaders shouted orders and demanded explanations. The High Sage called out that the human girl was a deceiver, and that this was clearly some elaborate trick to steal the sacred relic and undermine the Chevalerie claim to cosmic importance. But Arya simply smiled sadly and said the Chevalerie had been manipulated into finding that artifact because it was never lost but deliberately placed for them to discover at precisely this moment in history. She said the device was not a million years old but had been sent backward through time from the future, and that activating it had just announced Maya location to enemies who had been searching for her across multiple timelines. Maya reached the portal and paused at its edge to look back at the chamber full of beings who thought they understood the universe and its ancient mysteries but were about to learn how wrong they had been. Arya took her hand gently but firmly, and the dragon moved to shield them both as reality began to collapse inward around the activation signal still pulsing from the crystalline artifact. They stepped through together into violet light and impossible geometries, and Maya felt her consciousness expanding in ways that should have driven her mad, but instead felt like coming home after a long journey through foreign lands. The portal closed behind them with a sound like a door shutting on one life and opening onto another, and the council chamber erupted into chaos as species representatives demanded answers that nobody present could provide. the High Sage stood. The space between dimensions felt like falling and flying at the same time, while colors that had no names rushed past Maya consciousness in streams of pure sensation that defied description. Arya held her hand firmly throughout the journey, and Maya could feel the elf warrior presence like an anchor keeping her from dissolving into the chaos of unformed reality. The dragon flew alongside them through the dimensional tunnel with his wings moving in patterns that created ripples across the fabric of space itself, and somehow Maya understood that he was navigating rather than simply following. They emerged into a place that looked like a moon orbiting a neutron star, but Maya knew immediately that it was more than just a natural satellite because the structures built into its surface glowed with power that predated most known civilizations. Arya released her hand once they stood on solid ground again, and Maya stumbled slightly as her body readjusted to normal physics after experiencing the fluid nature of dimensional travel. The sanctuary around them was ancient beyond measure, with walls that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously and technology that looked organic despite being clearly manufactured by intelligent design. Maya wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but Arya held up one hand for silence and gestured toward a chamber deeper within the structure where they could speak without fear of being observed. The dragon followed them inside and then shifted his form, somehow becoming smaller and more compact until he was only the size of a large horse rather than the massive creature that had emerged from the portal. Once they were sealed inside the private chamber, Arya finally spoke, and her words carried the weight of knowledge that had been held secret for longer than Maya could comprehend. She explained that humanity was not the young species that the galaxy believed them to be, but something far older and far more significant to the structure of reality itself. Long before the current age of space travel and galactic councils, humans had existed as beings called architects who could manipulate the fundamental laws of physics and create technologies that shaped existence at its most basic level. Maya felt her head spinning as Arya described a war that had consumed multiple dimensions between the architects and something called the Void Collective, which sought to unmake all of creation. The Void Collective was not a species or an empire, but rather a force of conscious entropy that consumed entire universes and left nothing behind except the memory of absence. The architects had fought this enemy for longer than time could measure, and eventually they had won, but the cost of victory was so terrible that they chose to erase themselves from history. Arya said that the architects had scattered their consciousness across time and space, hiding pieces of themselves in ordinary lives, so that the Void Collective could never find them all at once. Maya had been one of the greatest architects, and her specialty was creating impossible devices that could manipulate reality in ways that other architects could not imagine or replicate. The crystalline artifact that the Cavalieri worshipped was not an ancient relic, but a weapon that Maya had built during the final days of the war and then sent backward through time as part of a larger plan. Arya herself came from a dimension called Elderness, where her people existed alongside normal space and served as allies to the architects during their desperate struggle against the consuming darkness. She had made a blood oath to find and protect Maya when the signs appeared that the Void Collective had somehow survived its defeat and was returning to finish what it had started. The dragon called Emberwing was not simply a companion but a fragment of the last architect defense system, given living form and personality through Maya owned power before she sealed away her memories. Maya sat down heavily on a bench that materialized from the wall at her unspoken need and tried to process everything Arya had revealed in the last few minutes. She remembered being just a normal girl from Seattle who loved old movies and terrible coffee and dreamed of exploring space with the diplomatic corps. But now memories were surfacing that did not belong to that life and showed her standing before assembled armies of reality itself, presenting weapons that could kill concepts rather than just physical forms. She saw herself creating the Nexus device not in a high school classroom but in a workshop that existed outside normal time, where each tool was a fundamental force made tangible. She remembered other architects whose names had no human equivalent and whose forms shifted between states of matter and energy and pure thought depending on their current needs. She remembered the first time the Void Collective breach into their reality and the horror of watching entire star systems simply cease to exist as if they had never been born. Most painfully, she remembered the decision to sacrifice everything they were, and everything they might become in order to ensure that future generations would have a chance to exist. Arya watched her with eyes that held both compassion and urgency. Because time was not on their side and the memories returning to Maya were only the beginning of what she needed to reclaim. The elf warrior explained that by activating the Nexus device before the entire Galactic Council, the Cavallari had sent a signal that would draw the void. Collective attention like blood in water attracts predators. The enemy would now know that an architect still existed in this timeline, and they would do everything in their power to either destroy Maya or corrupt her into joining their cause. Arya said that corruption was the greater danger because architects who lost their connection to mortality and empathy could become worse than the void itself in their hunger for absolute power. Emberwing moved closer to Maya and rested his massive head near her shoulder in a gesture of comfort that felt familiar despite her having no memory of this specific dragon. She reached out instinctively and touched his scales, which were warm and seemed to pulse with energy that synchronized with her own heartbeat. Images flooded, her mind showing her the moment she had created Emberwing from her own essence and given him to Arya as both weapon and companion during the darkest days of the ancient war. She saw battles across dimensions where Emberwing had fought beside Arya, against horrors that defied description and won victories that preserved countless innocent lives. She saw quiet moments, too, where the dragon had learned to laugh and play, and experienced joy despite being created for destruction and defense. Maya felt tears running down her face, but she was not sure if she was crying for what she had lost or what she was about to regain, or both at once. Arya knelt beside her and spoke gently, saying that they did not have much time before the Void forces located the sanctuary despite all the protections built into its design. She said that Maya needed to undergo a ritual that would restore her full memories and abilities so she could access the knowledge required to stop the Void Collective before they could gain enough strength. Maya wanted to refuse because she sensed that becoming an architect again would mean losing the person she had been for the past 24 years of ordinary human life. But Arya explained that the galaxy had no other defense against what was coming and that billions of innocent beings would suffer and die if Maya chose her own comfort over their survival. The dragon made a sound that Maya somehow understood as encouragement mixed with sadness, because Emberwing knew better than anyone what it cost to carry power that could reshape reality. Maya stood up and straightened her shoulders with a determination that came from both her current self and the ancient being whose memories were bleeding through into her consciousness. She said she would do whatever was necessary to protect the people she cared about and the countless lives that depended on her making the right choice. Arya smiled with relief and pride mixed together and began preparing the ritual chamber while explaining what would happen during the process of awakening. She warned that the experience would be more painful than anything Maya had ever endured, because centuries of compressed memory and knowledge would have to be integrated into a mortal brain. There was also the risk that Maya's current personality would be completely overwritten by her architect self, leaving nothing behind of the young engineer who had lived a simple life, but they had no choice except to try, because the alternative was allowing the Void Collective to consume everything that existed until only darkness remained where light and life had once flourished. Maya lay down on the ritual platform while Arya began inscribing runes that glowed with power drawn from the sanctuary itself and from the bond between elf and architect. Emberwing took up position beside the platform, ready to intervene if the process threatened to destroy Maya rather than transform her into what she needed to become. As the ritual began, Maya felt her consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of her skull and stretching across time and space to touch memories that had been sealed for her protection. She screamed as millions of years of experience crashed into her mind all at once, showing her wonders and horrors in equal measure and teaching her truths about reality that no mortal was meant to know. Somewhere in the chaos she held on to one thought like a lifeline, and that was the memory of drinking terrible coffee while watching the sunrise over Seattle before reporting for duty on the Odyssey Dawn. That simple human memory became her anchor, preventing her from dissolving completely into the vast knowledge and power that wanted to. Maya woke from the ritual with knowledge burning through her veins like fire that refused to consume but only transformed everything it touched into something new and strange. She could see reality now as it truly existed beneath the comfortable illusions that protected mortal minds from understanding the infinite complexity of existence itself. Every atom in the sanctuary glowed with connections to every other atom across all of space and time, creating webs of causality that stretched in directions that had no names. Arya watched her carefully with concern clear in her ancient eyes because she had seen this transformation before and knew how easily it could go wrong. The young engineer who had stood in the council chamber just days ago was still present, but now she shared space with someone who remembered building galaxies as experiments in beauty. Maya sat up slowly and felt her body responding to commands that existed outside normal neural pathways, as if her consciousness now extended beyond mere flesh and bone. She remembered everything now, including the faces of other architects who had been friends and colleagues and family before they made the choice to scatter themselves across eternity. She remembered a woman named Sophie who could fold space like origami and create shortcuts between distant points that made faster than light travel look primitive by comparison. She remembered a man called Lucas who specialized in temporal mechanics and could see all possible futures simultaneously, which had eventually driven him to madness and sacrifice. She remembered hundreds more whose names translated poorly into human language, but whose contributions to the war effort had been invaluable despite the ultimate cost. Most importantly, she remembered why they had chosen to forget themselves rather than simply destroying the Void Collective. When they had the chance, the Void was not separate from the architects, but rather what happened when beings of such power lost their connection to empathy and mortality and began seeing reality as something to control. Every architect who fell to that corruption became part of the Void Collective, adding their knowledge and abilities to an enemy that grew stronger with each addition. The only way to truly win was to remove themselves from the equation entirely. So the Void would have no new sources of power to corrupt, and eventually it would consume itself. But something had gone wrong with the plan, because the Void had not faded away as predicted, but instead found a way to persist by feeding on the remnants of their erased existence. Arya spoke carefully, asking if Maya still remembered who she was in this current life, or if the architect memories had completely overwritten her recent experiences. Maya turned to look at her and smiled, with an expression that held both ancient wisdom and youthful warmth combined in a way that seemed impossible yet natural. She said she was still herself, but that self now included millennia of memory and knowledge that would take time to fully integrate with her current personality. She remembered creating Emberwing from her own essence and gifting him to Arya. During a moment when they both thought the war was lost and only desperate measures remained, she remembered teaching Arya to fight not just with physical weapons, but with concepts and ideas that could cut through reality itself when properly applied. She remembered the blood oath that Arya had sworn and the promise Maya had made in return that she would always find her way back no matter how many times she scattered herself. Emberwing approached, and Maya reached out to touch him with fingers that now saw the complex web of energy and intention that gave him form and consciousness. She could feel the connection between them strengthening as her power returned, and she understood that his existence was tied to hers in ways that went beyond mere creation. He had saved her during the ritual by sharing his own memories of simple joys and small moments that reminded her why being human mattered even when cosmic power beckoned. Maya stood and tested her restored abilities carefully, because using architect powers recklessly could tear holes in reality that might never heal properly. She reached out with her consciousness and felt the sanctuary responding to her presence. As systems that had been dormant for ages recognized their creator and came back online. Defensive shields strengthened and weapons platforms that existed partially outside Normal space activated and prepared to defend against the void forces that would inevitably come. But even with all this power, Maya felt something missing, and it took her a moment to realize what bothered her about the situation. She turned to Arya and asked where the other architect artifacts were hidden, because the Nexus alone would not be enough to stop the void permanently. Arya explained that the pieces of the Grand Array had been scattered across the galaxy, hidden in places that only Maya would know how to find with her restored memories. The Grand Array was the ultimate weapon designed to sever the void collective connection to this reality permanently, so they could never return or threaten existence again. But assembling the array, REQUIRED retrieving components from extremely dangerous locations, and doing so would alert the void to their intentions, giving the enemy time to prepare. Maya closed her eyes and searched through her restored memories, looking for the hiding places she had chosen during those desperate final days of the original war. She found them one by one, seeing images of planets and structures and coordinates that existed in both normal space and the twisted dimensions where reality grew thin. The first piece was called the harmonic core, and it waited in the shattered belt, where physics did not work correctly and time flowed in loops. The second piece was the causality anchor, hidden in the ruins of the First Empire, which had fallen long before any current civilization rose to prominence. The third piece was the reality codex, concealed in the Kevlari, sacred archives where they had kept it without understanding what they possessed. There were other pieces too, but these three were critical to making the array functional, and without them the remaining components would be useless fragments. Maya opened her eyes and found Arya waiting patiently for her to finish processing the information and make a decision about their next move. She explained where the artifacts were located, and Arya's face grew troubled as she recognized several of the hiding places as locations now controlled by void forces. The enemy had been busy during the time Maya spent sealed away, and they had infiltrated the galaxy far more thoroughly than anyone realized. Some members of the Galactic Council were already compromised, replaced by void constructs that wore stolen flesh and manipulated events from positions of power. The Kevlari High Sage who had presented the Nexus was never real, but a puppet created to lure Maya out of hiding by activating the signal at precisely the right moment. Maya felt anger rising at the manipulation but forced it down, because emotion without control was dangerous when wielding power that could reshape reality. She said they needed to split up to retrieve the artifacts quickly before the void realized what they were planning and moved to stop them. Arya protested, immediately saying that separating was too dangerous and that they should stay together, where their combined strength could protect against any attack. But Maya shook her head and explained that time was running out faster than Arya realized, because the void was consuming reality at an accelerating pace. Entire star systems were vanishing from existence, not through destruction, but through erasure, as if they had never been born or existed at all. The void was editing history itself, removing obstacles before they could form resistance, and soon there would be nothing left to save. Arya finally agreed with obvious reluctance, and they began planning the missions that would take them to opposite ends of the galaxy. Arya would take Emberwing and retrieve the causality anchor from the First Empire ruins, while Maya infiltrated the Kevlari homeworld alone. The dragon made a sound of protest at leaving Maya unprotected, but she assured him that her architect abilities would keep her safe during the mission. Before they parted ways, Arya pulled Maya aside and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of ages and secrets that had never been shared. She revealed that in the original timeline, before everything went wrong, she and Maya had been more than just allies or friends. Arya had been created by the architects as a bridge between species, proof that different forms of consciousness could truly unite in common cause. Maya was essentially her mother in the truest sense, having given Arya life and form and purpose, when the elf warrior was nothing but a possibility waiting to be realized. The revelation hit Maya hard, because she remembered now the moment of creation and the hope she had invested in Arya. Success as a symbol of unity. She remembered watching Arya grow and learn and become someone unique, rather than just a copy of human consciousness in a different form. She remembered the pride and fear mixed together when Arya first went into battle and proved herself to be a warrior beyond compare. Arya took her hand gently and asked her to promise that she would come back safely because losing her again after finally reuniting would be more than she could bear. Maya promised, though both of them knew it was a promise that circumstances might make impossible to keep. They separated then, with Arya and Emberwing heading toward the dimensional portal that would take them to the First Empire ruins. Maya watched them go and felt the connection stretching thin but not breaking because they were bound by ties deeper than distance or time. Maya materialized on the surface of the Kevlari homeworld inside a shadowed alcove where surveillance systems could not detect her presence through normal means. The planet was beautiful with crystalline structures, rising toward twin suns that cast rainbow light across cities built over millions of years of careful development. But beneath that beauty, Maya could see the corruption spreading through reality itself as void entities worked to undermine the foundation of existence. She moved through the streets like a ghost, using her architect abilities to bend light around herself and slip between the moments when observers might notice her passing. The sacred archives were located at the heart of their capital city inside a temple complex that had stood since before the Kevlari had developed space travel. Guards patrolled the perimeter with weapons that could destroy matter at the molecular level, but Maya walked past them without triggering any alarms. Inside the temple, she found rows of artifacts collected over millennia from dead civilizations and forgotten wars that had shaped the galaxy. The Kevlari were historians and archaeologists by nature, and they preserved everything they discovered with religious devotion to knowledge and understanding. Maya searched through her restored memories looking for the exact location where she had hidden the reality codex during those desperate final days. She found the memory showing her younger self placing the device inside a statue that appeared to be solid stone but actually contained a pocket dimension. The statue depicted a chivalry warrior from their ancient past and stood in a chamber dedicated to military heroes who had defended their people during early conflicts. Maya approached the statue carefully because she had also installed defenses that would kill anyone who tried to access the hidden compartment without proper authorization. She placed her hand against the stone and felt the recognition protocols activating as they scanned her genetic signature and compared it to stored templates. The statue shifted and opened, revealing a space that should not exist within its dimensions. And inside that space, the reality codex waited exactly where she had left it. The device was smaller than the Nexus, but far more complex, with layers of meaning encoded into its structure that went beyond mere physical form. Maya reached in and lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of condensed information that contained the rules by which reality operated at its most fundamental level. With this device, an architect could rewrite the laws of physics themselves, making gravity flow upward or time run backward or consciousness exist without physical substrate. She tucked it safely into a dimensional pocket that existed alongside her physical form and turned to leave before the void forces detected what she had done. But as she moved toward the exit, Maya felt something wrong about the temple itself and realized too late that she had walked into a trap. The walls began to shimmer and shift as void constructs revealed themselves, having been waiting in positions that allowed them to surround her completely. They wore the forms of Kevlari priests and scholars, but their eyes held the emptiness of beings who existed only to consume and corrupt everything they touched. Maya prepared to fight, knowing that using her full power here would destroy the temple and possibly kill innocent civilians who had no part in this conflict. The void constructs advanced slowly because they were not interested in quick destruction but in capturing her alive so they could corrupt her and add her knowledge to their collective. She could feel them probing her defenses, looking for weaknesses in her consciousness that might allow them entry to begin the process of turning her into one of them. Maya pushed back with her will reinforced by memories of everyone she cared about and refused to let the darkness touch her core self. The battle happened mostly in dimensions that normal beings could not perceive as Maya and the void forces fought for control of reality itself. She created barriers of solidified time that the constructs had to navigate around while she looked for escape routes that would not endanger innocent lives. they countered by trying to erase her from history, working backward through her timeline to unmake the moments that had led to her current existence. Maya felt pieces of her recent past beginning to dissolve and had to anchor herself to the present moment using techniques she had developed during the original war. The fight was exhausting in ways that had nothing to do with physical effort, because each exchange cost her parts of herself that might never be recovered. She finally managed to open a portal, but one of the void constructs lunged forward and its touch burned through her defenses, leaving corruption spreading through her arm. Maya screamed and severed the infected limb with a thought, letting it dissolve into nothing rather than allowing the void essence to reach her core consciousness. Her arm regenerated immediately because architect bodies were more concept than flesh, but the pain of corruption remained as a warning of how close she had come to losing everything. She dove through the portal and sealed it behind her, leaving the void forces trapped in the temple while she escaped to a safe location. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Arya and Emberwing had reached the ruins of the First Empire and found them crawling with void entities. The dragon fought with fury born of protective instinct as he cleared a path for Arya to reach the chamber where the causality anchor waited. Arya moved through the battle like a dancer, with her starlight blade cutting through enemies that tried to block her progress toward their goal. She reached the chamber and found the anchor exactly where Maya had described it, but removing the device triggered defenses that began collapsing the entire structure. Emberwing roared a warning and began using his power to hold the ruins together long enough for Arya to escape with the artifact, but the effort cost him dearly as he burned through centuries of accumulated energy, trying to maintain structural integrity against impossible forces. Arya grabbed the anchor and ran back through corridors that were falling apart around her while void entities tried to cut off her retreat. She reached Emberwing just as his strength finally failed and the dragon began to fade as his connection to physical reality weakened from overexertion. Arya refused to leave him behind and instead used her own life force to anchor his existence, even though doing so meant tying their fates together permanently. If one died now, the other would follow immediately, because they had become linked at a level deeper than mere companionship or loyalty. Emberwing felt what she had done and protested weakly, but Arya simply smiled and told him they would face whatever came together as they always had. She opened a portal using the last of her strength, and they tumbled through it, barely ahead of the collapsing ruins and pursuing void forces. They arrived at the sanctuary badly wounded and exhausted, but alive and carrying the causality anchor that was essential to completing the grand array. Maya returned moments later through a different portal, clutching the reality codex and looking pale from her own battle with the void constructs. She saw immediately what Arya had done to save Emberwing and felt her heart breaking because she understood the price of that sacrifice better than anyone. The three of them gathered in the healing chamber, where the sanctuary systems worked to repair their injuries, both physical and existential. Maya explained what she had discovered in the Chevalier archives beyond just retrieving the codex, and the truth was more terrible than they had feared. The Void Collective was not an external threat that had returned, but rather what the architects themselves became when they lost their connection to mortality and empathy. The war had never been between different species, but a civil conflict between architects who retained their humanity and those who had discarded it in pursuit of pure power. Every time reality faced this threat, an architect awakened and gained cosmic abilities and eventually lost themselves and became the next iteration of the void. Then another architect would rise to stop them, only to fall to the same corruption, creating an endless cycle that repeated across multiple timelines. Maya had sealed her memories not just for protection, but to try breaking that cycle by remaining mortal and human despite possessing ultimate power. But now that she had awakened to stop the current void threat, she risked becoming the next monster that future heroes would need to fight and destroy. Arya listened to this revelation with growing horror because it meant that saving the galaxy might require Maya to sacrifice not just her life but her very soul. Emberwing made a sound of distress and moved closer to Maya, as if physical proximity could somehow protect her from the fate that awaited all. Architects eventually, Maya sat in silence processing what she had learned and trying to find a solution. That did not end with her becoming the thing she fought against. She had 2 artifacts now and knew where the third critical piece waited, but assembling the grand array might accelerate her corruption rather than preventing it. The device required channeling power that would make her more like the old architects, who had lost their way and become the void in their arrogance. But without the array, the void would consume reality itself, and everything she cared about would cease to exist in any form or memory. Arya finally spoke and said there had to be another way because Maya was different from the architects who had fallen before. She had lived as human for years and understood the value of simple. Maya stood in the center of the sanctuary chamber with the reality codex and the causality anchor arranged before her in patterns that existed across multiple dimensions. She still needed the harmonic core from the shattered belt, but that piece would have to wait because the void forces were moving faster than anticipated. Across the galaxy, entire civilizations were vanishing from collective memory as if they had never existed, and the rate of erasure was accelerating exponentially. She had maybe days before the void consumed enough of reality that nothing could stop them from completing their goal of total existence erasure. Arya watched her with concern clear in every line of her ancient face because she understood what Maya was planning and feared the cost would be too high. Emberwing lay nearby, still recovering from the energy he had expended holding the ruins together, and his breathing was labored despite the sanctuary healing systems. Maya knelt beside the dragon and placed her hand on his scales, feeling the connection between them pulsing with shared life force and memories. She told him that she needed his help one more time, and that what she was asking might kill him but would save everyone else if it worked. Emberwing lifted his head and looked at her with eyes that held understanding beyond what words could convey, and acceptance of whatever sacrifice was necessary. He had been created for this purpose, to serve as a bridge between mortal consciousness and cosmic power, and he would fulfill that function even if it meant his ending. Maya felt tears running down her face, but she did not have time to grieve for what had not yet happened when billions of lives depended on her actions. She began the process of modifying the array components to accept distributed input instead of singular control, and the mathematics involved would have driven lesser minds insane. Arya helped where she could, providing power from her own reserves and using her knowledge of dimensional mechanics to stabilize the increasingly complex structure. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, because time had lost meaning inside the sanctuary, where reality bent according to the will of those who understood its true nature. Finally, Maya completed the modifications and stood back to examine her work with eyes that saw beyond physical form into the realm of pure concept. The array was ready, but implementing her plan required one more element that she had been avoiding, because it meant acknowledging Emberwing would not survive. She needed him to create a network connecting every human consciousness across the galaxy, and that network would require his entire being as its foundation. He would become the living conduit through which cosmic power flowed to billions of minds, turning them all into fractional architects working in harmony. Maya explained this to him clearly and gave him the choice to refuse, because she would not take his life without consent, even to save everyone else. Emberwing considered for a long moment and then projected images directly into her mind, showing her what he wanted her to understand. He showed her memories of joy and laughter and small beautiful moments that he had experienced because of her gift of consciousness and individual identity. He showed her, teaching him to appreciate sunsets on alien worlds and the taste of food that sustained life and the warmth of friendship that made existence meaningful. He showed her that he had lived more fully in his centuries of awareness than many beings did across millennia of mere survival and routine. And he showed her that giving his existence meaning by using it to protect others was the greatest gift she could offer in return for everything she had given him. Maya broke down completely then, because the weight of what she was asking finally crashed through her defenses and left her raw and grieving. Arya held her while she cried and whispered that Emberwing had chosen freely, and that honoring his choice meant accepting his sacrifice with grace rather than guilt. When Maya finally composed herself, she stood and prepared for the ritual that would transform her dragon companion into a cosmic network spanning light years. Emberwing moved to the center of the array and settled into position with his wings spread and his consciousness open to receive the transformation. Maya began channeling power through the modified array and felt Emberwing essence expanding outward, touching every human mind across the galaxy simultaneously. She felt him finding each person and creating connections that would allow them to share in architect abilities without being overwhelmed by cosmic knowledge. The process was beautiful and terrible to witness as Emberwing physical form began dissolving into pure energy that spread across impossible distances. His consciousness fragmented but did not break, instead becoming billions of threads that wove together into a tapestry of shared awareness. Maya poured everything she had into stabilizing the network and anchoring it to her own existence so that Emberwing's sacrifice would not be wasted. She felt the moment when every human suddenly awakened to abilities they did not know they possessed and understanding they had never imagined possible. Confusion and fear rippled through the network, but Maya was there speaking directly to billions of minds at once, explaining what had happened and why. She told them about the Void Collective and the threat it posed and the choice she had made to give them power rather than let them die in ignorance. She told them about Emberwing and his sacrifice to create the network that now connected them all. In ways that went beyond mere telepathy, she told them that they could choose to reject this gift and return to normal existence, but doing so would leave them vulnerable when the void came for them. Most importantly, she told them that she needed their help to activate the Grand Array, and that success required them to work together. As one species united, the response came not in words but in a wave of acceptance and determination as billions of humans decided simultaneously that they would fight for their right to exist. Maya felt their support flowing through the network and realized that Emberwing had done more than create connections. He had given humanity something it had always lacked. They were finally truly united, not through government or religion or culture, but through shared consciousness that respected individual identity while enabling collective action. She activated the Grand Array and felt power flowing through the network as billions of fractional architects combined their abilities into something greater than some. The Void Collective sensed what was happening and threw everything it had at stopping the activation, but found itself facing an enemy it could not comprehend. How do you corrupt billions of individuals who support and anchor each other against darkness through bonds of shared humanity and purpose? How do you erase beings whose existence is reinforced by the memories and awareness of countless others who refuse to forget them? The array came online fully and began severing the void connection to reality itself, cutting away the corruption like a surgeon removing diseased tissue. The void entities across the galaxy began dissolving as their link to this dimension was broken and their ability to manipulate existence faded. Some of them were revealed to be fallen architects from previous cycles, and Maya felt sorrow for what they had become through loss of connection to mortal perspective. She reached out through the network and offered them something unexpected, which was the chance to rejoin humanity rather than face final dissolution. Many were too far gone and simply faded away, finding peace at last, after eons of consuming hunger that could never be satisfied, but others accepted her offer and felt their corruption burning away as billions of human minds reminded them what it meant to care about something beyond power. The process took hours that felt like years as reality slowly stabilized and the void influence retreated until only memory remained of the threat it had posed. When it was finally over, Maya collapsed from exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness into the realm of existential weariness. Arya caught her before she could hit the ground and held her close, while the sanctuary systems worked to repair damage that went deeper than mere flesh. Maya woke later to find herself in the healing chamber with Arya sitting nearby, looking exhausted but relieved that the worst had passed. She asked immediately about Emberwing, and Arya's expression shifted to sadness, mixed with something that might have been hope. The dragon was gone in physical form, but his consciousness remained, distributed across the network, connecting all of humanity in ways that would persist forever. Every human could feel him as a presence in the back of their awareness, offering guidance and support and reminding them why individual life mattered, despite cosmic perspective. But Arya explained that Maya had done something during the final moments of the array activation that even she did not fully understand. She had reached back through time to the moment before Emberwing was created and preserved that instant outside the normal flow of causality. In a hidden dimension that existed parallel to normal space, an egg now waited, containing all the potential of what Emberwing had been before war and sacrifice. When the egg hatched, it would produce a dragon who knew nothing of cosmic battles or reality manipulation, but only simple joy of existence and discovery. He would not remember being a weapon, or a network, or a sacrifice, but would have the chance to simply be alive without greater purpose weighing on every choice. Maya wept again, but this time with relief, because she had found a way to honor Emberwing's sacrifice while also giving him the gift of beginning fresh.